Now we get to the point where we kind of have a culmination of all of our references, because we're talking about indexes. An index is used in large documents to make finding specific pieces of information or content easier. It's more detailed than a table of contents that only provides major topics such as chapters, modules, or units, and it's arranged in the order in which those headings appear in the document. An index, on the other hand, is a little bit different. It's arranged alphabetically. It can include entries not only for headings, but also for words, phrases, symbols, and sections, and even things that we make up that may not exactly exist in that particular verbiage in the document. What's important to recognize is that indexes need to be done very specifically. If we try to index too much, our index could be bigger than the document itself. If we don't index enough, it will make information difficult to find. Don't forget that indexes can also contain cross-references, so that people can be guided to other related areas to find information when they may not know a specific terminology that's used in the document. In this sample file from your Project Files folder, many of the index entries have already been marked, just to save us some time. We're going to go ahead and add a couple ourselves, though, so we can see how the process works. Let's scroll down to where we see our Business Concept heading, which should be about on the top of page 5. If business concept is something that we want to have access to in the index, we simply need to start by selecting the text. Just as a matter of cleanup, I like to make sure we select the text and not necessarily the paragraph marker. That's not really critical, just one of my best practices. From here, we have a couple of options. We certainly could go up, make sure we're on the References tab, and go to the Index group. Here we have something called Mark Entry. Honestly, though, this is one of the times I don't really use the ribbon that much. I like the shortcut because when we're indexing, we're going to be doing a lot of work in the body of the document, and we kind of need to do it quickly. The shortcut is Alt-Shift-X. Alt-Shift-X brings up the index entry box. Since we selected the text first, it's already there. We really don't have to do much from here other than just make sure that everything's the way that we want. We're going to have a main entry called Business Concept. It's going to reference the current page. We don't care about making the page number bold or italics, so we'll simply click Mark. Now this box will actually stay open, but we're going to go ahead and close it so we can see things. We should know by now that references, when they're created in Word, whether we think about doing them or not, are actually creating little codes or fields. Here we can see the actual code for the index entry. If this bothers you, don't worry, you can always go to the Home tab and simply turn off your non-printing characters or your Show Hide button. That'll get rid of it. But just know, every time you create the next entry, they're going to come back, so you might as well leave it on while you're going through this process. What if we want to create an index entry, though, for something that doesn't exactly exist in the document? And here's what I mean by that. Let's go ahead and scroll down a couple of pages. And what we should see is that we have an entry where we start talking about our computer training. It starts with the heading called Products and Services. Well, products and services is a good word because that's actually what it is from a business standpoint, but most people will probably be looking for the term training because that is the product and service that You Got It Training Company offers. In this case, we're not going to actually select the text, we're just going to click in front of it. Then we'll use our shortcut, Alt-Shift-X. And this time, of course, because we didn't select anything, we need to type in what we want. So let's go ahead and type in the word training. This will allow people to look up the word training in our index, even though that word doesn't necessarily appear here as part of the heading. We'll go ahead and choose Mark, and we'll close. Now let's go ahead and do something a little bit different. We know that we have several types of training, and in the index, we would like people to simply be able to look up training, and underneath that, we would like them to know that there are categories of training, durations of training, and courseware that all have to do with training. In other words, we want these to appear as kind of subheadings underneath the training main category. We do this by simply beginning the same way, by first identifying where the index reference should be. Just before our first numbered list, we can see categories of training. So we might go ahead and double-click that. Then we'll use our shortcut, Alt-Shift-X. But this time, we don't want the main entry to be categories, so I'm going to go ahead and do Control-X to cut that. The main entry that we want is training, so we'll type that in instead. It is absolutely critical that what you type here exactly matches the entry that's in the index. So we have training. Now we want to do a sub-entry. I'll use Control V to paste it in. And then, of course, the rest of it's going to be exactly the same. We want it to refer to the current page where the cursor currently is, so all we have to do is click Mark. Let's do a couple more of these fairly quickly. The next one we want to look for are our durations. So let's go ahead and scroll the document. And this one doesn't have a nice little heading, but we can just put it at the beginning of the top of the next page, because this is where we talk about full day classes, power trip classes. That's where durations are. So what we can do is simply enter our sub-entry name, which in this case is going to be durations. Then, if necessary, we can come back to the main entry and type what that's supposed to be. It's still going to be training. We'll click Mark, and yes, we're getting there. We're almost done. Let's go ahead and in our document itself, scroll down just a little bit until we see the paragraph that begins talking about courseware. This is going to be our last entry. I'm going to go ahead and do a Control C to select this, paste it into our sub-entry, and then replace the main entry with training once again. And one last time, we'll do a mark. We haven't talked about it specifically, but we've done this kind of in other ways in the document, so I just want to tell you about it. We can create index entries with a cross-reference. For example, if I selected text, we could put in see something else. We also can say, instead of doing a current page, that we want to do a range of pages, if a particular topic goes across maybe 3 or 5 pages. In order to reference a multi-page section, though, we have to create it in a little bit different way. We need to select the entire section of text first and create a bookmark by using Insert Bookmark. Then we place cursor at the end of the section. When we come into this box, we simply enter the text for the entry, and then when we do page range, you can see where it will give us an option to actually then choose the bookmark itself. This will be available from a list. So there are a couple of options other than just using the text and using one reference point for the text. We simply need to work through them as appropriate for our document. I think what you can also see is that it may take a little bit of planning ahead of time to figure out exactly what words you want to be included in your index, where you want to reference them from within the document, and then you can go about making your marks. Let's go ahead and close out this box. I think you can already see that, especially in a long document, marking all of this by hand can take a little bit of time, but it is worth it. Notice that we also have, for you got it, a marker. When this was done, we actually selected the word and then we used the Mark All option, which makes it very fast. However, be aware that that means everywhere this word appears in the document, it's going to show up in the index. So we certainly wouldn't want to index words like the or and, because then our index would be larger than the entire document. You need to be selective. Let's go ahead and turn off these non-printing characters. Let's press Control End to get to the end of our document. And let's go ahead now and generate our index. This is actually, as you probably already know, the easy part. We go to the References tab, we choose Insert Index, and we get a window, not surprisingly. Here we can choose what we want to do. For example, if you want to right-align page numbers, you can. If you still want the tab leaders, you can. All of these things that we've seen in other references throughout Word. What's different, though, is we can choose the type, either indented or run-in, as well as how many columns, and this is talking about how many index columns on the page. We can choose, usually 2 or 3 is going to be best. If you have much more than that, then the columns become too narrow, just like our discussion on regular columns. We'll leave it at 3. We'll go ahead and say OK. And there we have a beautiful index. We can see several examples here of what we've been able to do. Compensation was actually entered as a cross-reference. If somebody's looking for compensation, they're told to see salary. We actually have an entry for salary that says that that's discussed on page 7. And if we look at training, training is actually a first-level entry, and then categories, courseware, and durations are subheadings underneath the main category of training itself. Finally, at the end, you can see my example of not necessarily wanting to index every word. Even though this is a fairly short document, the word "you got it," because it's the name of the company, shows up many places. I'm not sure that's very useful, so I probably would not index the word itself. Certainly by not marking all of the occurrences of it, maybe just by manually marking 2. In some ways, using references in Word is like documenting a building. We need some sort of references as to the overall structure, like a floor plan. It's nice to have some things labeled, like a circuit breaker box, as well as having a list of maybe who did certain work, like the electrical, plumbing, or landscaping, so we know who the source was. In Word, tables of contents, indexes, and the variety of content tools like footnotes, endnotes, bibliographies, and tables of authority, as well as tables of figures, allow us to more clearly understand our document and access those resources if need be. Many of them share similar parts of the document, but each has its own special purpose. In general, though, a table of contents is like a floor plan, while an index is like a detailed schematic of all of the systems, not just the rooms themselves. None of these things are usually required. They certainly aren't required for a building or for our documents. But when we include them, it provides a layer of information that will be useful for those